fields in those particular years. This is the first of the zigs I was describing as we work our way down to Utica, just where the buildings in the distance are now called South Lake Farms. There was mention earlier of a property called Liberty Ranch. Liberty Ranch sits just west of us and runs from here down to Utica Avenue. And the Liberty Ranch property, there's another sort of interesting trivial point of interest in the Tulare Lake bed. About a mile to the west, right about on the alignment that we're on now, is one of the other islands that was in the Tulare Lake. It was called Pelican Island. So I know it's sort of hard to imagine an island in the Central Valley. I mean, the valley is land, but we had a big lake, big enough that it had at least 2 islands. And when they named it Pelican Island, there was never really an accurate estimate of how many white pelicans were nesting there, but the estimates were up as high as 50,000. And those birds each had a 10-foot wingspread. They weighed on the order of 20 pounds each. So if you can imagine with the statistics you've heard about this very broad but very shallow, only about 20 to 30 feet deep in the deepest part, sun shining for a huge part of the year, shallow water, there was just the algae production, sort of like Doug was describing up there. The algae would lead to, would supply the food for a lot of invertebrates that would feed a lot of small insects, that would feed a lot of small fishes, and eventually to support probably tens of thousands of white pelicans is a pretty remarkable amount of biomass. In the past, in the early 1980s, I worked for the Nature Conservancy as a preserve manager on a piece of land that the Boswell Company owned, and they still own. But in the early 80s, it was called the Creighton Ranch Preserve. And when I worked there, part of my job was to sort of do outreach, meet the people in Corcoran, do a little bit of education and so on. And one of the what I consider to be a sort of major windfall of one of those talks was when I went to speak one day to the Corcoran Garden Club, and I met Frances von Glahn. She was the widow of one of the millionaire ranchers that once lived in this area and had their heyday back in the 30s and 40s. And her family was wealthy enough at that time that during World War II, when Tulare Lake came back in the floods of 1937, the lake stayed flooded for most of the war because there were a lot of distractions through those years and they couldn't pump that water out. She had gone out with her family in a rowboat in 1942 to one of the levees when the pelicans were nesting. So I've actually got, home 8mm movie film from 1942, color movies, with her and the family and the kids out walking around an island with pelicans nesting on it. And pelican eggs, if you can imagine the size of that bird, I mean a chicken egg, pelican eggs reach about this big, and each of the clutches on the ground had 2 or 3 eggs in it. And when they would run, the birds could barely even take off because they were sitting so close together that it was almost kind of a humorous scene to see that in the film.